The Appalachian Trail is about 2,200 miles, and it goes from Georgia to Maine. It goes through 14 states. The longest state is Virginia, which is about 500 miles. That's the longest section. But most people go from Georgia to Maine, from south to north, just because it aligns with the seasons. You wouldn't want to start in Maine in March because it'd be snowy, of course. You're going to start in Georgia. Take us through the planning. I've had several friends that have done the Triple Crown, which would, of course, be the Appalachian Trail, the CDT or Continental Divide Trail, and the PCT or the Pacific Crest Trail out on the West Coast. And they all say that it's usually they plan about $1 per mile is kind of one of the adages. That, of course, doesn't include the gear. But how did you go about, since you didn't have a whole lot of experience with backpacking, how did you decide what gear you should take and how to budget and how much food to carry, how much water to carry? I mean, there's a lot of things you can get into, but what kind of planning went into this?
Yeah.
Once you decided, like, hey, I'm going to do
Yeah. Well, I read a lot of books, and I joined a lot of Facebook groups just to kind of see what people were doing. And then I actually started my YouTube channel because, again, I didn't have a community. And I thought, well, if I kind of put myself out there on YouTube and start kind of connecting with other people, then maybe I'll learn something along the way. I reached out to some women through a Facebook group just to see if anybody wanted to do training hikes with me in the area. And I've met 4 women, and we ended up doing a lot of training hikes and actually did all of Georgia as kind of a jump start. So we did that all in weekends. And so when I started hiking full time, I actually was in North Carolina because I had finished Georgia. But I just immersed myself in as much information as I could possibly get. And I still didn't have a clue what I was in for, because it's just such a life-changing experience that you just don't know what it's going to be like till you actually start hiking. But I started with basic gear, inexpensive gear, went out on the weekend hikes, and then I would come back and figure out, okay, what do I need to change? What do I need to upgrade? And I didn't have a lot of money set aside for the hike. So I went to REI when they were doing the garage sales, once a month, and you could line up outside and try to score some gear. And so I got a cheap tent that way. And the first sleeping bag I had didn't work out. So I had to get something lighter, finding out what other people were using and just trying to learn from other people because I, didn't know. I didn't know what I didn't know.
How long did it take you to hike the Appalachian Trail?
That's a complicated question. Most people do it in, if they're fast, maybe 4 or 5 months, 6 months usually. But for me, I started on my 52nd birthday, and that was also Easter that year, and have a whole family in North Carolina, and we just sent me off on my way. I was determined that I would do it in about 6 months. I thought that I could do it in about 6 months, but pretty quickly I started having foot issues. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. And so that took me off the trail 3 different times for anywhere from 2 to 4 days. So I lost time there. And about halfway through, I was in Virginia and I got a call. You don't have cell service the whole way. So you check in when you can. And I remember I just got up to the top of a hill or top of a mountain, and I checked my phone and I had messages from my mom. And it's like, oh boy, I better call her back. I haven't talked to her in a few days. And she's like, oh, I've been trying to reach you. I have to have heart surgery in a few weeks. So I got off trail for a week to be with her for that. So all these kind of stops and starts led me to more of an unconventional hike. I considered it kind of a hopscotch hike in the end, because after I went to Florida for her surgery, then I had been in Virginia, and I jumped up to New York to meet some other people that I had met that were hiking, because I had gotten kind of way behind the bubble, and I was concerned that I might not get to Maine in time. Because, if you get to Maine too late, you can summit Katahdin, but you might be in really terrible weather if they haven't closed the mountain yet. So I jumped ahead, and then that left me a big gap that I knew I was going to have to loop back and finish later. So I just jumped ahead a couple of times, and it got really complicated. And I was like, this is just hopscotch, and I'm just going to do the best I can, because I tried and tried and tried to get that whole thing in one stretch, and it wasn't going to happen for me. So I ended up actually leaving some miles. So when I summited Katahdin, it was beginning of October, and I had a trail family at that point. I didn't have a trail family the whole time, but we kind of coalesced in early or beginning of Maine, and they were all done. We got to the top of that mountain, they were done with their hikes, and I'm like, crap, I got to go back, So I went back south and started working my way southbound to try to fill in those gaps. And then I had a few spots that I need to go hit the next year. So long answer to a short question. Yeah, that was 7 months altogether that I was out. So
if it wasn't for that kind of family emergency, would you have made it in one season?
I think so. When I started, I didn't know. And I thought, I'm doing this because I think I can do it, but I'm not sure. So I want to find out if I have it in me. And I felt very confident by the time I went home. It was almost Thanksgiving by the time I went home. And I was like, yeah, I felt like a through hiker. And it was ironic because I had gone back through Harper's Ferry and gone into the ATC there. And I was explaining to the guy, all the things that I'd been through to try to finish that hike. And he just looked at me and he's like, do you feel like a through hiker? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like I've had all the experiences that make you a through hiker, the trials and tribulations and problems and hitching and, everything that comes along with it. I just didn't have all the miles done. So, yeah.
How many miles a day did you start out hiking? And then what did you eventually work your way up to?
I started with maybe 8 to 10, so kind of slow. Maybe the first couple of days might have been like 6 or 7, but I had intended to take the first couple of weeks and just kind of take my time ramping up. In hindsight, I wish I'd ramped up faster because I think that would have gotten me further to where I needed to be. But by the time I was in Maine, I was doing 18 to 20 with the trail family. And part of that is because they're trying to keep up, right? And the days were getting shorter. So we were hiking a lot faster and, just like getting through the 100-mile wilderness. We wouldn't hike together necessarily. So we would say, okay, we're sitting out here and this is where we expect we're going to be at the end of the day. But sometimes if I was dragging, I'd be behind them and I'd get to that shelter and they wouldn't be there. So I know they'd gone on to the next one. I'd be like, okay, I got to just book it as fast as I can to catch up with them or else be left behind. But I was feeling good. That's probably the best shape I've ever been in is by the time I got to Maine.
How much weight did your backpack weigh?
When I started.
And how much were you carrying?
I tried to get it as light as I could. And again, not knowing what I didn't know. I mean, I was getting the lightest gear that I could afford, but I probably was 27 pounds-ish, 28 pounds when I started before food and water. And so every month or so, when I would go into town, I'd take a zero and I'd like literally, be in a hotel room and I'd like, I'm going to take a pound out of my pack. No matter what happens, I'm going to figure out how to get a pound out of my pack. And so I would spread out all my gear and I'd pick some things that I could either just discard or send home. And I would do that and see. I remember there was one thing in particular. I had a coffee mug, one of those little kind of insulated mugs, the plastic ones from GCI or something. And I was like, I don't know if I can live without this mug, So I sent it home and I was like, I might want this back in 2 weeks. I don't know if I can live without it. I sent it and I was like, didn't even miss it. So that taught me that, I can live much more minimally than I think I can. So I would say by the end of that hike, I was down below 20 pounds base weight, maybe 18-ish. And now 6 years later, I'm at like 15. And that's just because I know I could be lighter, but I like some luxury items. I like to be able to sleep well, that sort of thing. So I take a pillow and some other niceties. But yeah, it's a process. It's definitely a process.
Let's just say hypothetically that you had someone that's like in their late 50s or early 60s that's retiring and they're thinking like, hey, I want to hike the Appalachian Trail. And they don't really have a good idea of what it entails. What would the first principles be? So like, what would the planning of the trail? How would you advise that? What about purchasing gear, training prior to beginning the trail, things like that? How would you advise that person or couple, whatever?
Yeah. First thing I'd say is to, start getting physically ready because that can take a lot of time, especially if you're just really not in shape and you're not used to walking a lot. People say that the best way to train is on the trail, which I agree with, but I think there's a lot of things that you can do before you get on the trail or just walking into your local park to start getting your body used to moving that way and doing step ups and doing cardio and those kind of things that are going to just get your body more conditioned so that when you get out on the trail that you're prepared to do the weird things like scrambling over different height rocks. It's not climbing stairs. Well, there are stairs in places, but a lot of it is just the terrain is just different and not things that you're used to doing at home in terms of how you move your feet and muscles that you use. You don't really get that unless you actually do go out and hike. So I recommend that people just kind of start small and work their way up. Even if they're just flat trails around a park, that's a great way to start. And then as you feel more comfortable, go out and do, longer hikes, do overnights, camp occasionally so you can test out your gear, those kind of things just to sort of ease into it, I guess. I mean, and there are plenty of people who just go out there cold turkey and just put themselves right on the trail and start like they're like, here I am, I'm doing the AT, but a lot of those are the people that end up getting off even in the first few weeks or, first month because it's not what they expected or their body's not ready for it. The physical conditioning is really important. And then the mental training is invaluable just because you don't know what you're going to encounter. And it's such a different lifestyle. And if you're used to just, living in a big house with a yard and, driving your car everywhere, and it's a whole different thing to have everything that you need in a backpack and be able to live that way and know, okay, well, I might not be in town for 4 or 5 days. So I have to have the things with me that are going to support me, whether that's, first aid or sleep gear or jackets or whatever. You need to be very self-sufficient. And on the AT, there's a lot more support than some other longer trails that I've done. So, there's a lot of trail angels. There's a lot of road crossings where you can get off if you do need help and that sort of thing. But still, it's a different mindset to be like, you know what, I am taking care of myself out here, and I'm going to be resourceful. I'm going to figure out how to make things work and power through even when I'm having a really crappy day, because otherwise you're going home and you're not finishing.
How much preparation would you advise? I've had dozens of friends that have, like I said, have done the AT, and less that have done the Triple Crown, but I've had dozens of friends that have done the AT, and most of them have had like mail drops where they'll have, food shipped out along the whole route, so they can just go into town and pick up their supplies. And I've had other friends that have done it without really any money, so they would just go into town broke basically, and wash dishes for a day at a restaurant or find some construction job for a few days to get some cash and then be able to resupply. On a lot of hitchhiking and kind of unplanned excursions. I'm 42 now. I used to do a lot of hiking. I've never done anything as long as the Appalachian Trail. I've never really had a desire to, but I've done multiple week trails. I've hiked through Yosemite, and I've done the Colorado Trail or massive sections of it. I've done most of the 14ers in Colorado. I don't like camping out for that long, which is why I've never done like an extended hike. But I feel like as I've gotten older, I've just gotten softer, so it's like, do you need to spend more days in town to like get into hotels and have some more 0 days? What's kind of like a realistic strategy here for people as they get a little bit older? Like, so when you're young, your body's a lot more resilient, we'll say that.
That's true. It can take a lot of abuse, right? And I'm noticing this now. I'm 58 now, and I'm like, man, things just don't heal as fast as they did. It's like I was like shaving my legs the other morning, and I looked down. I'm like, that scar. Wait, where'd that come from? And that was from the Colorado Trail last summer. So, and I fell and I scraped my knee, and I was like, dang, that scar is still there, And I bet you when I was 25 or 30, that would have just been gone in a few weeks, right? So everything seems to take longer to heal, even if you're in really good health. I think that's just part of the aging process, right? Things take longer, And I had to learn how to be kind of hiker trash. I just wasn't used to that sort of mentality of like, it's okay to be dirty. It's okay to be hurt. It's okay to sleep on the ground night after night, and you try to be as comfortable as you can, but it's not your bed at home. But one perk, I think, of being older for a lot of people is that they've worked a long career and they've set aside more money, and they can probably spend a little bit more money on a through hike, so they can afford to go into town maybe once a week, or even take a 0 once a week and stay in a hotel, or eat a lot more food, or restaurant food, good food, things that cost a lot of money that somebody who's younger, a lot of people are doing the trail maybe just right out of school, and they've got no money saved up, and so they're doing like what you said, they go and they work for stay at a hostel instead of having to pay for a hostel, or they go in and wash dishes, or they stop for a week and do work, odd jobs, to make money to continue on. And I knew people like that on the trail. I was fortunate because I had enough money to pay for my hike at the time. My circumstances have changed now, so I'm more frugal than I was when I did the AT. But there's definitely advantages when you're a little bit older. But the disadvantage, I think, is that, your body does not respond as well. And it can be harder to hike long miles. I was on the Pinhoti Trail a few weeks ago, and I just noticed like the heat was really getting to me. And 14-mile days, 15-mile days, I was like, man, I am wiped out, where that didn't used to bother me as much. But I think pacing yourself, maybe trying not to hike as fast, giving yourself more recovery time, things like that are things that you can do to be kind to yourself as you get older.
You do van life. You're out in Colorado. I think I saw a blog where you thru-hiked the Colorado Trail. How would you compare, say, van life, hiking the Colorado Trail, and some of the other thru-hikes you've done to the Appalachian Trail?
Appalachian Trail was amazing. It's just like, it's always going to have a place in my heart, I think, because it was my first through hike, and it taught me a lot of things I needed to learn about just resiliency and being self-sufficient and being minimalist. And I don't think I ever could have done van life if I hadn't done the AT first, because When you live in a van, same thing. Everything you have is in that van, and if you're going out boondocking or something and there's no town for quite a ways, you need to make sure you got your water just like you do when you're hiking, and you got your food, and you're going to be warm or you're going to be cool or whatever you need. The AT really prepared me for the van life, but I'm learning as I'm doing different long distance trails that each one is very different and it's got its own kind of characteristics. So like on the Colorado Trail, it's absolutely beautiful. The climbs are different. You got the AT, you kind of go straight up and straight down. There are not that many switchbacks. And the Colorado Trail is graded differently. So a lot of those climbs are longer, even though you're going to higher elevations. They're longer and a little bit easier than just going the straight up and straight down. That can be pretty brutal on the AT. And like the Pinhoti was completely different. I'm getting ready to do the Tahoe Rim Trail later this summer, and I know that's going to be completely different. So I'm learning that I can't assume just because I've done the AT that all these other hikes are going to be easier for me, because they're just different. They're different.
You never had any issues being by yourself in terms of safety, whether it's from other people or from animals, wildlife, etc.?
I've never had any real wildlife issues. I started the PCT in 2022. And I scared a mountain lion, which I didn't see the mountain lion, but I know what it was. And I scared it. And I was like, that kind of shook me up. And I was like, well, I was by myself and I wasn't making a lot of noise. So I'm not surprised that, I think the mountain lion was sleeping on a bluff up above me. And I must have just come around the corner and scared him. I was like, ooh, that's not ideal, right? So that was a little scary, but it didn't scare me enough that wasn't why I got off trail. I got off trail because I had an injury, but it just made me a little bit more wary, I guess. Savvy. I don't know, maybe that's a better word. On the AT, the only creepy experiences I had were camping, where there were some other people around that maybe weren't, entirely savory people, I guess. I don't know how you describe that. So there were a couple times that I was camping, but ironically, those were not right on the trail. They were camping areas that were kind of off trail, that were closer to a road or where people could come in by car instead of other hikers. So other hikers have never really been an issue for me. I know that scares a lot of people. They're afraid of, what kind of people they might meet on the trail. I try to be as safe as possible. I did after the AT, when I went back and started hiking south, and I was going through Vermont and I didn't see anybody for like 3 days. I was like, I need to get an inReach. I didn't have an inReach at the time, and I didn't have a way to communicate if I didn't have cell service. So when I went home, I got one and I've used it ever since. So at least I know if I'm having an issue, I can reach out through the GPS, even if I don't have cell service. And I usually, when I get into camp, if I don't have cell service, I'll send, you can send like canned messages. And I've got one that says I'm in camp for the night. So I can send that to my family and they know where I am and it's got my GPS coordinates on it. So that makes me feel safer. When I had that incident on the Colorado Trail and I decided to get off, I had to use the inReach to communicate and logistics to be able to get picked up. So that thing has been a lifesaver for me, just having that and the peace of mind that gives me. But I think as you hike, you learn how to be safe, and I think if you understand the wildlife that's around and you're prepared for what you might encounter, a lot of you do you see a bear and things like that, gives you a lot of sense of security that you're prepared and can handle those situations.
How much food do you carry? Like, how many days worth of food are you carrying? Are you carrying 3 days worth of food, 5 days worth of food, 7 days worth of food? Are you carrying a liter or 2 liters and just running with iodine tablets or water filter? I mean, what are some more of the specifics when you get down to the logistics of it?
Water, I've learned I can carry a lot less than I used to think that I needed, which is great because, 2.2 pounds per liter, water is really heavy. So I usually, unless I know it's going to be a really long water carry, I usually have maybe a liter to a liter and a half. On the Pinhoti, we had like a 14-mile water carry one day and it was really hot. So I think I had a little over 3 liters, 3.5 liters. But that's about all I carry unless I know I'm going to need more. I just try to reduce it because it is so heavy. And I've learned, a lot of people use the Far Out app for water. And I've learned that they have water sources listed in there, but there's also usually a lot of water sources that aren't listed for whatever reason, whether it's maybe just a little ways off the trail or it just hasn't made it into their system yet. So I find a lot of times when they tell you you're going to have to go 10 miles without water, you might go 3 and find a little creek that's flowing where you can get some. And I just use a filter to clean it. I do carry micropure tablets, little tablets that you could put in. So if the water's like really super sketchy, I might add that to it. But normally I just filter it and put in electrolytes to keep me well hydrated. So try to, carry as little water as possible, but not be dangerously low because I don't want to run out and be dehydrated. So I don't usually finish my water until right before I get to the next water source, or when I get there, if I have a little bit left in my bottle, I'll just chug it and then fill up and do what they call camel up, where you drink as much water as you can at the water source and then go on with what you want to carry. So that's water. And then as far as food, I try to plan ahead, know where the next town is, and have enough food to get there. I tend to carry a little bit more food than I need to. So I usually have like an extra day, partly because like, on a trail like the AT, you might run into somebody who had a bear encounter and they lost their food and you want to share your food, or whatever other reason they're short on food, or just as a safety issue. I think you just never know. If you plan for 3 days or 5 days, something might happen. You might be out an extra day. So I carry, some extra snacks, some extra packet of oatmeal or ramen or something like that I can extend my trip a little bit if I need to, just for those reasons. But just try to not carry too much more than I need to, because it's heavy, and weight matters, especially as you get older. I think the weight really matters, because that's, what you have on your back is like magnified by the time it gets to your knees, it's more impact on your knees and your hips. So I try to be really sensitive as far as how much weight I'm carrying, but not be stupid.
How many times did you hitchhike while hiking the AT?
Not many, really. And again, because I could afford to arrange a shuttle, or if I stayed at a hostel, a lot of times the hostels would pick you up. So I didn't want to hitchhike a lot. I wasn't really comfortable with hitchhiking. And so I just tried to arrange my hike so that I didn't have to hitchhike that much. There were a few times when I did, but if I did, it was usually with another person.
So would you say that you were in like under 10 times of hitchhiking the whole time? So fairly been right. Okay.
Yeah.
What would you say is the age group? I've talked to a few of my friends prior to this, and they said that they thought most of the AT through hikers were somewhere between like right out of high school and like 25, so kind of student age, and then older, like 55 plus. People said a lot of teachers that will do sections in the summertime, and then people that are retired. What did you find in your experience is kind of like the average age group?
I think that's pretty accurate, because there's a lot of people who are young and either they're going between high school and college, or they've just finished college, or they're between jobs. And they're like, okay, I could take a few months and I can go do this 6-month trail, or for them, it might be 4 months, 5 months, if they're fast hikers. And then the people that I didn't see a lot were the 30 to 40 somethings, because a lot of those are, they're deep into a job, or they've got young kids and that sort of thing, where it's harder to get away. There were lots of people who were retired military that can retire early because they've done their 20 years, so they can get out while they're younger, and then they might be going on to another career after they've retired, but they're taking even a year or two sometimes to just enjoy being relatively young and getting out and hiking. So there were a lot of people in that, retired firefighters, civil servants, and then there were people in their 60s and some in their 70s even. But a lot of them were doing things like you said, like sectioning. I met a few people who were hiking together, but they had 2 cars, and so they drop a car at a trailhead at each end and then hike and then pick up the car and just kind of do this sort of loop thing, that worked for them. And some people would spend almost like every night in a hostel or in a hotel. So there's ways around doing many, many days of hiking. But I think to answer your question about the age groups, I think it was interesting to me that there was just sort of vacuum around the 30, 40 somethings. And then you had the younger people, and then a lot of people who are older. So I think for people who are thinking about hiking, they're like, oh, I'm 50 something or 60 something and I'm too old. You're definitely not. There's plenty of people in that age group that are out there.
If you were to do it over again and you're 60, I mean, what's the optimal strategy? You think like switching the cars as you get older? I've hitchhiked a lot of places, and I mean, I could certainly do without it, more so just because I hate waiting.
Yeah. Yeah, there's that, right? Yeah. Waiting for somebody to come pick you up. Yeah, it's frustrating. So most trails, there's ways that you can get around hitchhiking, but like I'm doing the Tahoe Rim Trail, that's only going to take me 2 weeks. But if I want to go into towns other than what I've planned, those are going to be hitches, So I'm either going to have to do it or have to hike longer. And I think that's kind of was sort of my strategy on the AT, is like, I'm going to hike until I can walk into town so that I don't have to hitch, or I'm going to hike until I know I can have a hostel come pick me up, just because it's just something that, particularly solo, as a solo female, I feel real comfortable with hitchhiking. So try to avoid that. But
I went to Yosemite National Park and I parked at the entrance, went to the ranger shack, whatever, and I got the permit to do the half dome. I hiked through the whole park, did the half dome. I don't know, it's like 8 days, whatever. It's not a very big park to hike through it. And then I hitchhiked back, but it took me, I think it was like a 9 or 10 hours of trying to hitchhike. It was like the most frustrating part of the whole trip. And then this 17-year-old girl in a Prius actually picked me up. She's like, my parents would kill me if they knew I was doing this, but she's like, I just feel so bad for you. You look so sad. I was like, she's like, how long have you been out here for? I was like, I don't know, like 8 or 9 hours. You know?
Wow. That's hard. Yeah. A strategy I guess I haven't mentioned is like, instead of hitchhiking, I kind of try to yogi a ride. And yogi is a term for people that aren't familiar with it. It's like when you might meet some section hikers who say, we're getting off trail tomorrow. And you're like, oh, well, I don't have a lot of food, and they're like, oh, well, I don't want to carry this home. You can have it. So it's a way to kind of just persuade people to give you something that you would like without coming right out and asking. So, if you go to say you're in a camping area or a trailhead and there's a lot of people leaving, you can be like, hey, are you going to town? Do you mind if I get a lift with you into town? And to me, that's a little safer because you can kind of size them up before they get in the car. And, when you're hitchhiking, sticking your thumb out, somebody pulls over, it's kind of, you don't know what you're going to get, right? So I felt more comfortable kind of trying to yogi a ride with somebody. And that worked for me a few times. It just kind of like putting on a sad face and be like, I don't want to walk all the way. Can you give me a ride? So that works.
What's the motivation for some of these people that are close to retirement or retired to hike the AT?
Well, I think if you've been sitting in an office for your whole career, the motivation is to get out and just do something. It is literally life-changing. I mean, I don't think anybody could hike the whole Appalachian Trail and not come back somehow different. So the opportunity, if you can take it to do something that's going to just, in a way, kind of rock your world and help you become a better version of yourself, hopefully, why not go do that? Like in my case, when I started, I was 52 and I had just found out that I had osteopenia, which I was like, whoa, it felt like a death sentence because I'm like, okay, if I was 72, maybe I would, not have been surprised, but I was like way too young for that. And I felt like if I don't start really taking care of my body, if I don't start getting active and doing weight bearing exercise, and backpacking is an amazing weight bearing exercise, then I'm going to be old and decrepit well before my time. And so just the idea of being able to do something that not only was enjoyable and just a really life-changing experience, that it would also help me stay more physically fit was something that I really wanted to do. I was like, I want to stay healthy. I don't want to be one of those people that, is old at mid 50s and, looking at just sitting on the sofa for the rest of their life. I didn't want to be one of those people. So backpacking, and I kind of have two speeds. I have like couch and trail, so I'm lazy when I'm at home. I try to get out and hike and that sort of thing, but I do tend to be kind of lazy. So if I didn't plan long distance hikes every year, then I might be one of those people because it's just so easy to just not do things. But it's really important to me that I want to get out. I want to see the country. I want to see all these amazing things and stand on mountains where so many people don't get to do that. It's such a privilege to be able to be like physically able and to have the resources to go do it. And I think if you do have that and you can do it, then, why not? Why stay home?
What's the difference in terms of the Appalachian Trail versus, you mentioned the Colorado Trail, just in terms of the altitude and elevation? The Appalachian Trail, I think the highest point is somewhere in the Smokies at was it 65 or 60 600 feet. And then you figure like the Colorado Trail, I mean, you have sections that I believe are, 14 or certainly 13, you're at between, 11, I would say a lot of it's between 10 and 12,000.
Yeah. I think the high point's like 13,300. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So did you ever have any issues with the elevation on the AT? How would that compare with some of the hikes you've done out the western region of the U.S.?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Florida, so I was at sea level for all of my formative years. And I just remember on the AT, like you'd be like, oh, I got a 2,000 foot climb. It seems so high, And, Siler Bald, I think is a little over 5,000 feet. They seem like really big things if you're not used to that. And I never really spent any time out west, so I didn't know what altitude was like. And I was really nervous the first year when I started the Colorado Trail because I was like, I don't know, And there's a group on Facebook about altitude acclimatization. Acclimatization is a hard word to say. And so I joined that group to figure out, what do I need to know? How do I need to acclimate? And a lot of people just start, they fly in and they start right away. And I think they have a little bit more trouble with altitude. If you're starting from Denver, it's a little bit more gradual than if you were to start in Durango and go north. So a lot of people go southbound on the Colorado Trail. But still, you're at 5,000 feet. So if you're coming from sea level, that is a big change for your body. And it's better, I think, to have a few days to acclimatize before you start hiking. Thankfully, I didn't really have any issues with it. And then ironically, I ended up moving to Colorado like right after I got off the trail. So didn't see that in the plan, but it happened. So when I did it last year, when I started over, I had been living in Colorado for a while and I was able to train at elevation, and that made it a little bit easier. But I think it would be rare for somebody to have altitude issues on the AT, but the climbs, like I said, some of those climbs are a couple thousand feet up, over the course of a couple of miles, and that can be pretty tough on the body. Whereas on the Colorado Trail, in most cases, you do have a few big climbs, but most of the time, maybe you're starting at 10,000 feet and going to 11. So you're already at high elevation. And I think the high point, that 13.3 that I mentioned, was not really a big climb that day to get there. It was kind of just a slow, steady climb. And then all of a sudden you're up on this big mesa and it's like, wow, this is as high as it gets, So it was pretty cool. Actually, my buddy Gunslinger was having some trouble with altitude that day and a couple of days after that. So we did have to go down, because if you're having some symptoms of altitude sickness, the best thing to do is just to go to lower elevation. And so we did. We got off the trail. We went to town and took a zero so she could kind of recover. And then we went back and she was fine.
What do you recommend people budget for a lot of these? If someone were to start the Appalachian Trail, I have all my gear. I haven't actually bought any new hiking gear in years, but I feel like if I were to buy gear nowadays, I feel like I'd be at least $5,000 in gear between the sleeping bag, the backpack, the tent. Those are probably your biggest items right there. And then if you use hiking poles, nice hiking poles can get, a few $100. Of course, you're going to need headlamps, right? There's certain other things, but this stuff it adds up, especially when you really are prioritizing weight, because the fact is, if you're buying cheap gear, it's going to be heavy.
Yeah.
And it's going to be unreliable. So
it's going to cost you more in the long run. Yeah.
That's the one thing I learned. I hiked around Kauai. I did the Nepali coast and lived in Nepali for a while when I was younger. And I went I bought all the cheap gear and I had to rebuy everything because it was just such crap. And you end up, you might as well just buy it right the first, just spend the money and just do it right the first time, because you're going to pay for it down the road. You're going to have to buy better gear and buy it twice.
You pay for it. You pay for it physically too. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and that's physically, the backpack's not going to be comfortable, and the straps are going to cut into you, and you're going to have scars from this crappy gear. Yeah. How much money would you say that you need to budget for gear, and then how much money would you recommend budgeting for a through hike of the Appalachian Trail in terms of meals, maybe doing some 0 days at a hotel, got to take showers, etc.?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when I did the AT, I did track all my expenses, and it was a longer hike than most. And I think I included everything I spent, including travel to and from home and all that. And it was close to $10,000. So it was a lot of money. But now I know that you don't have to spend that much money. There's a lot of strategies that you can use to save money. And I think I did a video not that long ago talking about the planning and that sort of thing. And I said that you could, for a couple $1,000s, do a through hike. And some people that were watching had issue with that. And I was like, but you can. And I work for an outfitter, so I know how much gear costs. But instead of buying cheap gear, I would recommend getting used gear, good quality used gear, because then you can, the more lightweight something is, the more expensive it tends to be. But people who buy lightweight gear also tend to upgrade, and they always want the lightest and the newest thing. And so then they sell things that are relatively lightweight that somebody could pick up for a lot less money. So you could conceivably get a full backpacking kit that's relatively lightweight for about $1,000 if you had the time to research and decide what you want. And that's what I tell people, okay, if you're looking for a tent, pick 2 or 3 tents that you really like and then start shopping for them. Either look for them on sale. Like if any one of these 3 tents will do, when you find that deal, whether it's used or a discount or something, then jump on it because you already have done the research and you know what you want to buy. But you could easily spend, like you said, you can easily spend $5,000 on gear, but you don't have to. And part of that is not buying things that you don't need. Like I bought so many things that I thought I needed as I learned to be more minimalistic, like that mug, I was $15 or something. All that stuff adds up. So the less individual things that you buy, and the more time and research you do to make sure that you're buying the right ones, then the better that is for your budget. So if you decide to hike and you've only got like 2 months until your hike, you're going to spend a lot more money because you're just having to buy what you can get, But now gear is more available, but at the same time, it is expensive. So if you can spend the time to find something that's gently used and save money that way, that's great. I have a sleeping pad that I bought, and it's like almost a $300 sleeping pad, and I got it for like $80 at an REI garage sale. And they don't do the garage sales like monthly now. They have like a section in the store where you can go in and see what's available. And it's things people have returned. And a lot of times it's somebody tried it and just didn't like it. So there's nothing wrong with it, but it's marked down by like 50%. So you can save a lot of money that way. But I would say if you can afford to budget, $4,000 or $5,000 for a through hike, that's probably going to be a pretty comfortable AT hike. Because that's basically like $1,000 a month. A little bit more if you can, so that you can enjoy being in town, have more town food, more convenience food, things like that. Do side trips. It's nice to have money to do side trips too. In the Shenandoah, some people just want to float down the river, and you can do that, but it costs money for those things. So if you go really bare bones and you don't do all that kind of stuff, then you can hike for a lot less. If you want to have a lot more of those kind of experiences and spend more time on the trail or go into nicer hotels, you can stay at the Motel 6 or the Super 8. It's not going to be that expensive in a trail town. It might be, $60, $80, $100, and you split it with 3 or 4 friends, right? But if you want to go someplace really nice, then it's going to cost you 2 or 3 times that. So just a lot of it's just decisions, and back to being kind of hiker trash. It's like, how comfortable are you with being slightly uncomfortable? Is it worth it to you to be uncomfortable to save a little bit of money? It is for me. I don't mind being uncomfortable. I don't want to be miserable, but I don't mind being a little uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah, one of my buddies that hiked the AT, he said that you find a lot of gear the first 100 miles where people are just, they're like, oh man, I bought all this stuff I don't need. So he's like, you have an opportunity to kind of upgrade stuff, where people just quit and they're just like, he said that in his experience, probably 10% of people quit hiking the AT maybe 30 miles in.
It's amazing. Yeah. And that kind of, in a way, that sort of breaks my heart, because I'm like, some of these people have been planning for months or years for this trip. And then they get out there and they're like, because they haven't done the shorter trips, or they haven't done the shakedown hikes, and they don't know. And maybe they got 40 or 50 pounds on their back and they're miserable and their feet hurt, and they get to Mountain Crossings. It's like it's right near Blood Mountain in Georgia. And it's pretty early in the trail. And a lot of people quit right there. They quit before they even get to North Carolina. And it's like, wow, that's sad. But it does pay off for the rest of the people, because then they can go dig through a hiker box and be like, what gear is in there? And I can leave my thing for somebody else and pick up something different. So that works great for food and for resupply too. I mean, I would go into a hostel and I would make a list while I was on the trail. Like, these are the things that I want, because I want to maximize my time in town. And like, this is my grocery list. And then I would go look in the hiker box and see what's there, and take that and drop off things that I didn't want anymore. Like I have a weird affair with oatmeal. Sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. I might drop 3 things of oatmeal in there and pick up some bars for breakfast instead. And then I haven't spent any money at all, and I can go to town with just half that grocery list and get the things that I really need to buy. Also, a tip on that is like going to town with friends, or resupplying with other people. So if a lot of hostels will take you to Walmart to resupply, which I don't really understand, because you go to Walmart and you buy a box and it's got 10 granola bars in it and you need 3. But if you're with a friend, then you can split things up, which saves a lot of money. But yeah, for gear, hiker boxes are great. Or just talking to people. And that's another advantage of there is a lot of benefit in the community, because there are Facebook groups for gear, just to get secondhand gear. And even just knowing people who hike, you can find gear just like by mentioning. They might be like, oh, I'm getting a new tent. You're like, well, what are you doing with the old one? That's a pretty nice Nemo tent. Can I buy it from you? So that's a good way to pick up some gear too.
What did you prefer, the Appalachian Trail or the Colorado Trail? Which one, if you just had to hike one, what would you say is better?
If I had to choose one to hike right now, I would do the Colorado Trail again because it's just so beautiful, just such an amazing experience. They're both challenging in their own ways, but I don't have a lot of time. Like I mentioned, I started the PCT and then I was thinking, well, I'll go back and do it another year. But 5 or 6 months is a long time for me right now to go and hike. So my goal for this year is like 4 shorter through hikes, which is why I did the Trans-Catalina Trail and why I'm doing the Tahoe Rim Trail. And I think I'm learning that every trail is so different that it would be hard to pick one to hike over and over again. But yeah, right now I would do the Colorado Trail again.
How far did you get on the PCT?
Only 80 miles. Yeah. So yeah, sadly. Yeah. And it was funny because I didn't realize I was injured till I got off the trail. I just kept having this nagging feeling that I was not in the right place at the right time. And I went into Julian. I got back on the trail and I hiked up about 2 miles and I'm like, yeah, I just have to listen to this feeling. And I went back to town and within a couple hours, I could barely walk. And when I got home, I went to the doctor and it turned out I had tendonitis in the tendon that supports your arch, which is why I couldn't walk. And I had also a stress fracture. So I ended up in a boot for like 8 weeks. And I was like, I had no idea, but I just knew something wasn't right. It was a weird feeling. And I think anytime on the trail, it's important to kind of listen to that intuition because your body will tell you things that sometimes your brain doesn't want to really acknowledge. Yeah. So that's another one that'll be on my list sometime. I don't know if I'll ever be a triple crowner, but at least I'll get out and do those trails.
Like I've had a lot of friends that have done the AT and they say the AT oftentimes is like a party trail.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. People get stuck in the vortex. They go into town, they stay in a hostel and they just party for days, And I think that happens more when you're young. I mean, some people when they're older, they get that, but yeah, I think that happens to a lot of the younger people. But yeah, I think, a lot of people, having done the Colorado Trail 1.5 times, a lot of those people, even if they hadn't done a long distance trail before, they were very fit. They tended to be people who were, they'd done 14ers or they'd just done backpacking and that sort of thing. On the Appalachian Trail, I think you end up with more people who, like me, have never done a long trail or even much backpacking at all. And they're learning as they go. Or they may be like, I'm going to do this trail and I'm going to get fit on the trail, which, I lost 20 some pounds, 24 pounds, 25 pounds, I think, when I was on the AT. So you will, lose weight because it's hard to put enough calories in your body to compensate for what you're burning as you're hiking. But I definitely think that the Appalachian Trail is much more kind of beginner friendly, partly because there are so many towns, partly because there are so many people, trail family, the party thing. There's just such a huge community around the AT that you don't necessarily have on some other longer trails. So I think that's what makes it, kind of socially friendly and easier to get your head around, I guess, even though it's longer.
Right. Of the 3 great trails, the Appalachian Trail, the Continental Divide, and the PCT, the AT is the shortest, has the lowest elevation, and you go through the most cities, so it allows you to restock and hit hotels a lot easier. So you think that would be the ideal one, basically, probably to start if you're thinking like, hey, I want to do one of these 3 epic trails in the U.S., especially as maybe you're a little bit more advanced in age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and they say that the PCT is like technically easier. You do have, Mount Whitney and some other big climbs and snow and that sort of thing, but they say the grade is easier, even though it's a little bit longer than the AT. Because the AT is, in stretches, it's very physically demanding. But yeah, because of all those other reasons, I think it's more of a beginner-friendly kind of trail.
So thank you, Joey, of the Joyful Rambler YouTube channels, for joining us. What's a final thought people should know?
I think that if you want to do something, you got to find a way to do it. Just go for it and don't let yourself talk yourself out of doing something. It's really easy to do that. It's really easy to let self-doubt creep in and not follow through. But I think there's a lot to be learned, even if you don't accomplish the goal. So I just encourage people to, if you're dreaming about something, figure out how to make it happen.
My dear friends, that is it for this episode of El Podcast. Once again, if you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe on YouTube as well as Rumble. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from. We thank you all from the bottom of our hearts for watching and listening, and we will see you on the next episode.